Today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, we're going to take a look at a few races going on right now in the general and the House. Specifically, we're actually going to go through some Herald-Leader articles on these specific races. Not as much because, and I know that Herald-Leader obviously is more liberal and everything else. It's not just because in one of the articles I was actually quoted in and asked my opinion on for it, and I want to go over what I said there. But it's also because these articles point to, they have several Democrats quoted in them, and it points to what Democrats in the state are thinking of state-level races this year and why I think they're a little bit detached from reality. But also, I think going through these articles, we're going to end up touching on some problems going on with the Republican Party establishment. I kind of talked about this yesterday, where, you have these factions breaking up within the Republican caucus, especially in the House, of different individuals, and there's a lot of conflict. And you hear from the establishment people, you hear from these individuals that, there's conflict because these people are crazy and they suck and they don't want to work with anybody. But my point, and the point I made yesterday, is that these people, specifically these members of the establishment, they don't even try to work with those who are part of the other factions. And you could say, does it fall on them to do it, or is it more the candidates to do it or not? And I think in large part, whether or not it's the candidate's job falls to what the establishment did, but we'll kind of go into expound upon that idea as we kind of dig into the article. So we're going to be talking about these wedges. We're going to be talking about just elections in general, so should be an interesting episode. But please make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. Make sure if you're listening to this on any of the podcasting platforms, you go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Make sure you leave a comment if you can anywhere you're listening. Make sure you also leave a review. Reviews help the show, help spread it out there. And obviously, as we grow our audience more and more and more, my reliability on making sure I do these shows grows more and more. I know I've been pretty awful. I only did 2 last week. I've missed already a day this week, but quite honestly, I'm pretty busy right now. It should calm down for me here in a few weeks, especially as we take a look at going into this next session. It becomes even more important to make sure we're tracking different bills and legislative priorities. But, it's just that time of year, get a little bit busy, but we'll dig down into it today. So first, let's start off with this 45th House District article. So this was wrote by Austin Horn in the Herald-Leader. I think Austin Horn wrote all these for the voter guide on the state House elections. And this article is called Thomas Jefferson and Adam Moore gives KY's 45th House District 2 very different options. Start off in the article here. The southwestern suburbs of Lexington are about to get a new state representative. Their choices, Republican Thomas Jefferson and Democrat Adam Moore, are quite different from each other. They're also different from the incumbent, Representative Killian Timoney, a moderate Republican who Jefferson handily defeated in this year's GOP primary. Handily is a understatement. Thomas Jefferson beat him 75-25, despite Killian Timoney spending over $500,000, over 10-to-1 spending ratio. Killian Timoney still lost by large portions. Jefferson is a Republican focused on social issues and support for Amendment 2, which would allow taxpayer funds to go towards K-12 education outside of public schools. Adam Moore is a Democrat, emphasizing opposition to the amendment, his experience in the military, and the relatively minuscule Democrat caucus. Timoney is perhaps the most prominent moderate Republican in the 80-member House caucus. His positions as one of the few GOP members against Senate Bill 150 was blasted by Jefferson and allies. The hotly debated 2023 bill outlawed gender-affirming care for transgender youth, banned lessons on gender identity and sexual orientation in the classroom, and prohibited trans students from using restrooms that correspond with their gender identity. One mailer from an outside group, Make Liberty Win, framed Timoney's vote as the telltale signs of a predator and called him Groomer Killian. The incumbent representative, who's an administrator in Fayette County Public Schools, also stood against most of his parties, on matters of the school choice. He joined Democrats in opposition to the bill Amendment 2, putting Amendment 2 on the ballot this year, and the bill would have funded charter schools in the state. Republican voters in the primary election rejected the more moderate and much more better funded candidate by a wide margin of 2,773 votes to 1,072, or 72% to 28%. But the question facing Jefferson and Moore this general election is whether voters on both sides of the aisle are as convinced that Jefferson is a person for the job as the Republican electorate was. During the last contested election, more than 27,000 people voted, and the general populace of the district is politically purple. As former Republican President Donald Trump won it by 3 percentage points in 2020, but Democrat Governor Andy Beshear won it by 21 points last year. According to the elections analysis website Dave's Redistricting, House 45 skewed about 5 points towards Republicans from 2016 to 2020. It's about 81% white. Biggest minority group is Asian. 9.1% of residents that identify themselves as Asian, making it the most Asian House district in the state. Now, I'm reading through this, and we're digging through this, and I know some of you are like, wow, you're really covering like this entire article and some parts that maybe aren't as important. But I do think it's important we kind of lay down this groundwork, because the first thought process here, because what we're going to hear, I think from Adam Moore digging into this and from people, is that this race is really purple. It's a toss-up. Is that Adam Moore is got a real good chance of winning. Adam Moore himself will make those statements. And in this article, you'll hear it. You'll also hear the Democrats chime in on Trump. And so I think we will end up digging into how Trump affects down ballot, but how that overall comes together. And I think it's important that I lay this groundwork that's laid out in the article early before I talk about my commentary into the race itself. So that's kind of why I'm going through this a little bit more. Now, digging back into the article here, neither of the candidates will have the explicit backing of Timoney, who emphasized to the Herald-Leader in a statement that he's never endorsed in a race before. The constituents of the 45th District results, not political coattail riding or political posturing. I know that both candidates are working hard right now, but the hardest work begins the day after the election, Timoney wrote in a statement to the Herald-Leader. Representing a bipartisan district is very hard to do without a heart for compromise. So here's the candidate pitches. Moore is pitching himself as a candidate with the heart for compromise, with a generally less emphasis on party affiliation that will show up beside his name, at the ballot box. This is where it gets interesting now, okay, as we talk about Adam Moore's background. So he's an Afghanistan veteran who once interned for Senator Mitch McConnell and now works as a fitness trainer. Moore said that he has the profile of a Democrat who might get elected to such a politically purple district. I felt like I was the right person to be doing it. Someone who was a former Republican, someone who was in the Army, who I think could resonate with a lot of voters in the district, who maybe have traditionally voted for more conservative values. I think I'm the right person to be that kind of middle-of-the-road Democrat to really represent the district well. So let's pause there. So revelation in this for a lot of people is that Adam Moore used to work for Mitch McConnell. Adam Moore was a Republican. Now, that's interesting on its face, just because as we're seeing the trends in Kentucky, is that more Democrats are becoming Republican, not Republicans becoming Democrats, which is a fascinating point. But it makes more sense when you look at who he worked for, who has shaped his belief on politics. And what we see is it's Mitch McConnell. Now, Mitch McConnell is definitely one of the types to view, frankly, just viewed the R next to his name as a way to, maybe adopted it early on because of some sort of, belief or something. But really, it's just using the party, using the R in order to advance his more so political agenda. Because what Mitch McConnell believes is a conservative agenda right now is to spend a lot of money overseas, not worry about cutting spending too much. He disagrees on where to spend money, but not how much money to spend with the Democrats when it comes down to it. And so, that's not a traditionally conservative belief. That's not what the baseline voters believe, which is why, Mitch McConnell is the most hated senator by his own party, but he's also disliked by the Democrats. This also falls into the Democrats to think about, well, do we really want this fake Republican or fake Democrat? That argument can definitely take place. So that does portray, though, how they're thinking about the district. They're thinking that it's a purple district because they think that, well, Trump only won the district 4 or 5 points in 2020, but Bashir won with 21 points. Here's the first thing you have to realize in politics. You cannot compare how a district will perform based upon how it does in off-year elections on a presidential election year. Presidential election years are extremely hard to model because people get turned out to vote for the president. You have higher turnout. The higher the turnout, it gets a little bit interesting. The lower the information voters are out there, the more they default to simple things like, oh, well, they got a D next to their name or they have an R next to their name. Now, it's very clear that Adam Moore is not wanting to identify himself as a Democrat. In fact, later on in this article, I am quoted. Andrew Cooperrider, a well-known media figure in the Republican Liberty political circles, who's been assisting the Jefferson campaign. I occasionally volunteer. Let's not get carried away with assisting. Anyways, disagrees sharply. This is obviously an uphill battle for Adam Moore. I think you can tell that in how the campaigns are messaging. Adam Moore is staying away from mentioning that he's a Democrat, while Thomas Jefferson isn't running away from the fact he's a Republican. And I think as well, and I also talked about this, about Trump being in a better position than he was in 2020. People are not as animated necessarily to vote against him. You don't have the COVID issues going on. And I think even the more moderate Republicans are back on Team Trump. I think that's true. I think that you can tell in the polling data, at least, that this will be that Kamala Harris in the polling data is performing worse than Joe Biden did. Now, when you look at that polling data, the one thing I'm worried about when I'm trying to ascertain, ascertain beliefs to make out of the polling data, ascertain conclusions, is that I'm worried that they overcorrected the Trump effect. So we all know that in 2016, they massively underpolled Trump. And we know in 2020, they also still underpolled Trump. They had Biden winning, and Biden, according to Election Day results, won. But he definitely underperformed what they were polling him at. So Trump overperformed what they were polling him at. So the question becomes, have they tried to look at that and say, look, we've been so far off on Trump all these times around, we need to overcorrect. And so we're going to go ahead and try to fix that, but now they've juiced up the numbers to the point where Trump is his polling is overperforming what he's doing. Now, I don't think that's necessarily the case because you got to look at the internals. And we know for right now the internals are pointing towards a Trump victory based sheerly just upon how both campaigns are behaving. Kamala Harris seems angry, upset, doesn't want to be there, doing some odd things like going to Texas and Tim Walz to Kentucky. But at the same time, Trump looks like he's enjoying himself, having a good time. He's doing that McDonald's bit. It's just vastly different behaviors out of the campaigns, which leads to a different conclusion. And so now returning to the article, though, so I make my points about Trump being in a better position. I believe he's in a better position than he was in 2020. So if the district went 10 points for Trump, let's say, in 2016, and that's important because if we rewind to 2016, the district how it was drawn priorly because it was redistricted, Trump, I believe, lost the district. I believe Trump lost the district by a few points under the old lines, but Killian Timoney won with 600 votes. So now you go over to 2024, and you have it in a position where I think Trump will probably win the district with, I would say, somewhere between 8 to 12 percentage points, probably closer to 10. I'm just telling you, I've been knocking this district. I'm telling you, I think it's closer to 10%. So if Trump wins the district by 10 points, and the old Republican Timoney won by 600 votes when Trump lost an old district, even though it's been redistricted, that's why Trump can make that kind of swing. You got to say down ballot's going to have an effect, and Adam Moore's definitely fighting an uphill battle as far as it goes. More still, in his argument of why it's purple, He cited Beshear's win as well as a 49% finishes for Democrats like Representative Pamela Stevenson's run for Attorney General last year and Charles Booker's bid for the Senate in 2022. So that indicates in the off-year elections, even when top of the ticket, incumbent Beshear wins by 21 points, down ticket, when you had Pamela Stevenson, who spent money in Lexington, by the way, and Charles Booker, who spent a lot of money and was atop of the ticket race in 2022 against Rand Paul. And he had money to blow, and he spent in places like Lexington, and they knocked doors too. And even then, they still finished with only 49% in off-year. That means that this district, at the top of the ballot, off-year election, did go for Beshear by wide margins, but down ballot, apparently, it went for Republicans, which means the default of the district is Republican. And this goes into the main point of how these House races, I think, are won or lost in generals, when there's something else going on at the top of the ticket, like a presidential election. Apathy. Nobody's paying attention. I tell you what, I know from experience, you go out there, you knock on the doors, you could be a day or two behind your opponent or the opponent of the race you're knocking for. And they just knock because you're seeing their lit on doors or whatever. You can be hours behind them even. And you knock on the same doors they knocked on a day or two ago. You see the lit. You know they talk to these people. And they won't have any idea who these people are. They won't recognize the names. They're not paying attention because it's a down ballot race. There's an interesting, and I bring this up when I talk to people about down ballot races, there's an interesting thing that occurred in 2022 that I always stare at as a really shocking example of how much people really don't care about down ballot races. Now, in the primaries, there's no easy DNR, you see. That's why the primaries are really a strong competition. That's why there was more money spent in the primaries than is going to be spent in the general election on this race from either side. Because quite frankly, it's hard to fight against the fact that you have a D or R. It's kind of like already preset. You're really just trading with maybe 5% of the swing vote. And you hope that that 5% swing vote that may turn out, you can swing, but maybe you can't because they're not paying as much attention. And so the race I look at to point out that there's really not much swing vote and people really don't pay attention to down ballot races is I look at two races from 2022. You had Bryson DeGussie Quinn running against Donald Blevins, who was the Fayette County Circuit Clerk in Fayette County. And then you also had Sheriff Karen, Witt, here in Fayette County, incumbent, that there's a Republican running against her, okay? So you had two incumbent Democrats. Now, Donald Blevins spent nothing. He didn't even file a KREF report because he's like, I'm not even spending $5,000. He literally didn't spend $1. Not $1, okay? Meanwhile, Bryson DeGussie Quinn running against him spent like $80,000. Had TV ads, put up signs, knocked doors, went to events. Donald Blevins didn't. She did the work. Then on the other side, you had an incumbent Democrat, Kathy Witt. I'm sorry, is her name Kathy Witt? My apologies. Kathy Witt, who spent like, I didn't look at the KREF recently, but last I looked, I think it was like 80, 90K. Like spent money, did work, knocked doors, put up signs. Versus a Republican opponent who didn't raise like any money and didn't do as much work because obviously, not as many volunteers and not as much opportunity there. Now, I would argue both these races should get more attention than a state house race would because you see a sheriff's cruiser like every day. So you're reminded that the sheriff exists every day. And the county clerk is where you go for your vehicle registration and you pay him taxes. You get postcards in the mail from them. So I would argue that the average person has more interactions with their sheriff's office and their county clerk's office than they would their state house rep. So you have one side, incumbent spends $80K. You have the other side, incumbent doesn't do anything. You have one side where the opponent against the incumbent doesn't do anything against that $80K. And on the other side, you have somebody who did a bunch of work and spent like $80K. So you've got like a $160,000 difference between the two. Opponents who worked for us didn't work. And you know what the outcome was in that election between the two? Bryson and Gussie Quinn got all of like 2 to 3 percentage points more than the Republican opponent against Kathy Witt did. All that work, tens of thousands of dollars versus an opponent who didn't do anything, was worth 2.5 percentage points, 3 percentage points. Because there's still an R next to the name, and you were still a down ticket race. And so I think that's what's incredibly important when it comes to these races. This is why I do not think it's competitive. Don't get me wrong. Thomas Jefferson can't do, he can't do nothing. I don't know if that's proper grammar, but he has to do something, right? And he's doing it. Out knocking doors, sending mail, campaigning, doing that, reminding people he exists. But at the same time, I do not think personally it's as competitive as Adam Moore wants it to be. I get the sale. He has to sell people on it because he's got to bring in the money and, he's looking at his own race. And there's very few seats that are even possible for Democrats to pick up in the first place. Few up in Louisville. This is probably the only one in Lexington that you could see a conceivable way that a Democrat could win. But I just think in a presidential election year where people are paying attention to the top of the ticket, there's so much determination there. I fail to see a world where Donald Trump, at the top of the ticket, wins this district by 5 points or 10 points, and then Thomas Jefferson doesn't win by similar margins. I fail to see it. Because who shows up and says, oh yeah, I'm going to vote for Trump, and then looks down and says, but this Democrat, he's okay. It doesn't really happen typically, and especially too in a district where historically down ballot Republicans have performed better than top ballot Republicans have. That their default is Republican, but if a Democrat can make an argument at the top of the ballot, they're switched over. But like I said, there's apathy. There's not paying attention, The average person that they're knocking on when they're out here in the general has no clue they live in the 45th district. They have no clue that there's this race going on between Thomas Jefferson and Adam Moore. It's just the facts. They're not paying that much attention. So I think that comes into play here. I think what's also interesting when we look at this race in the 45th district, which makes it just really fascinating to me, is the Republican establishment's behavior. Just really the Republican establishment's behavior across this entire election season. So I point out in this article that I think the only thing Adam has going for him is that the Republican establishment is very petty, Cooperrider said. They're the first to say that we should support all Republicans in the general election, but then every time it comes to the general, and you have a Republican that defeated one of their favorite incumbents, they take their ball and go home. While Adam will be getting a lot of party support from Democrats and the Democrat establishment, Thomas will not. And, obviously Thomas will not be getting Republican support. And I think this is really telling. And why is it that the Republicans establishment won't support Thomas Jefferson? They have a few competitive races going on. Sure. And they could say, look, we're really just worried about holding on to our incumbents. But then it would fall to, why are you so concerned about Vanessa Grosso? And I think this goes into play of how the Republican establishment is looking at things. You see, while Thomas Jefferson is a Republican, has an R next to whose name is more conservative than probably most of the House reps up there now, remember, Adam Moore used to work for Mitch McConnell. And when you look over at the Vanessa Grosso race, you're seeing somebody where she's up against Sherilyn Stevenson. Sure, they want to take down Sherilyn Stevenson. But what's the use of taking down Sherilyn Stevenson if you end up, so you pick up that seat, but then you lose this seat? That is easier for you to obtain. Here's the thing, right? You're looking at this race, and if you think that this race is even close. Now, perhaps they've pulled this race and they say, oh, he's not of any concern there. He's going to win. But if you think that'd be the case, you think that then the Republican establishment would want to go ahead and put some money down in order to get some goodwill with Thomas Jefferson. Because here's the other thing that I notice out of the establishment Republicans. And this is why I think it falls on them to bridge the gaps after the primaries, not the other way around. Because what we will see, inevitably, during the primaries is the establishment will go full throat in their endorsement of their establishment person. They'll spend money. The HRCCC, House Republican Caucus Campaign Committee, will spend money in the primary. Leaders in the House and Senate will spend money. We'll see, run-of-the-mill PACs that are being run by individuals spend money, like we'll see in the primary there for Timoney. You'll see all these Republicans spending money for Timoney, but then Thomas Jefferson defeats him. Well, now you have a person that you spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to defeat. If you want to build a bridge with that individual and bring them into the fold, like you say you want to, like they pretend they want to, you think you'd maybe try to toss them a couple of extra bucks to say, hey, we're just defending our incumbent, but now that you're the Republican, we'll defend you too. No hard feelings. It's just how we operate. We defend who's ever currently in office or whoever is currently the R that holds that seat. Well, now you're going to be the R that holds that seat, so we're going to throw some money behind you. You think that'd be the way they do it, but they don't. And then they wonder and they sit there and they complain and moan about the establishment Republicans will complain and moan about these liberty Republican legislators are too conservative and crazy and don't want to work with anybody. You just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars against them in a race, calling them, in this case, a radical liberal and all these other things. And then you're shocked that when they win, despite all your efforts, and you don't do anything to bridge the gap, you don't even talk to them. They're not happy-go-lucky, get along with you. They won't do whatever you tell them to do when you never even sat down to have a heart-to-heart conversation about anything. You shouldn't be shocked. Of course that's what happens. But they don't want to support Thomas Jefferson because he's not willing as much, and this is the real problem, to give up his political beliefs. But when you flip over to the Vanessa Grosso side, they're more than very willing to support that. For example, GOPAC is dumping some money into the 88th district race against Vanessa Grosso against Sherilyn Stevenson. And GOPAC, in large part, a lot of their funding for the state's controlled by Damon Thayer, the current Senate majority leader in the legislature, who's also in that district area. Scott County lives there, so he's a little more invested. But part of the reason why they would dump money into Vanessa Grosso is not just because it's in the district with Scott County. If you think some conservative Republican, like we had Aaron Yates, who won the nominee and was running for that seat in 2020, won the primary, would get the same support, you're mistaken. He didn't get that same support. So it's not just because it's in the district in Scott County, it's because Vanessa Grosso has something that other people don't. What does she have? Well, outside the fact she's a former Democrat, she has a unique ability to completely sell herself out for political power. And that's what they're looking for. They're looking for that political climber. And I use as an example this most recent article from the Herald-Leader where they looked at the Vanessa Grosso-Sherilyn Stevenson race. And one of the things that Vanessa Grosso refuses to do is to take a position on Amendment 2. She will not say how she feels about school choice, they said. Which is fascinating because Vanessa Grosso sat down at a group of people. There's 7-8 people there, sat down in front of people talking to me. Has talked to me a few times. Has talked to others. And has proclaimed loudly that the entire reason why she decided to run for office is because of education. In fact, right now she works for an education company. And she sees that school choice is really important in Kentucky, and that's what she's really passionate about. But she won't take a position on the amendment. Now, I may say, Andrew, that might just be prudent politics. You want to get into office, maybe it's best you don't take a position on the amendment, so that way, people don't go ahead and you don't lose because maybe the amendment loses in your district or whatever, and that will end up affecting your ability to win. So you don't want to talk about it there because you don't want to drag other issues in. And I'd hear you on a normal issue. For an example, if this was the abortion amendment in 2022, that was on the ballot, the pro-life amendment, that was really just enshrining something the Constitution already said. That wasn't necessarily necessary to keep our abortion regulations in place that we had. That does protect life, don't get me wrong, But like I said, just isn't as necessary. And I say that because obviously the court ruling keeping our current laws in place still held, even though that amendment didn't pass. Or they're still in place now, even though that amendment didn't pass. Which tells you so far that amendment, while it was good precaution, wasn't exactly necessary. However, when it comes to school choice, this amendment Vanessa Grosso refuses to take a point on, that does need to pass. You literally cannot do anything school choice. If what you're passionate about as a legislator, and if the whole reason why you ran was school choice, then you need the school choice amendment to pass in order to accomplish that, period. Period. And if you're not willing to say, yeah, I'm willing to put my ability to win or lose on that amendment, then you're not truly passionate about it. That isn't why you ran. Now, the real reason why somebody like Vanessa Grosso wins, somebody who was a Democrat delegate, was so involved with the Democrat Party recently, that was a delegate for them at a convention. That's a pretty big deal. Voting member of the state party. Like, not just like casual member. Like, oh, my registration is Democrat, but I really wasn't involved. No, that's involvement. Donated money to Pete Buttigieg during the 2020 presidential election cycle. That's how involved. So when you have somebody that involved, that then changes over to a Republican and is now running for office, that says they changed over because of school choice and they're really passionate about it, but now won't say anything about the amendment, you can only come at one conclusion: she is running, simply put, for political power. And that is exactly who the Republican establishment wants. Somebody who wants political power. Somebody who's willing to sell out their principles to get a position as chair of a committee in order to just get a little bit more favorability with the legislature, so they'll pass a bill of hers that doesn't really do anything, but gets to say she went ahead and she passed something. That's the kind of person they want. A person who will toe the line for political power. They don't want somebody else. That's why they'll dump tens of thousands of dollars to beating Sherilyn Stevenson for no good reason, but then turn around and say, 45th House District, we don't really care if Adam Moore wins that. Sure, we'll lose a seat, but we care more about keeping Thomas Jefferson out. That's the dynamic that's going on. And we have to be honest about that for two reasons. One, as conservative Republicans, and if you listen to this podcast, I imagine you're mostly a conservative Republican. You do not want to elect Republicans into office that you later have to take out in a primary. Remember, it's a lot harder in a primary to take on an incumbent who has earned name ID now after years in office, 2 years, 4 years in office, who can also bring in more money, gets HRCCC to make an excuse to dump money into their campaign, than it is to take out somebody in that loses in a general, and now you have a primary with an open seat. So if I'm a conservative, I say maintain it. Let's get Thomas Jefferson in here, and let's not vote in the 88th House District race because we don't want to put somebody else in that we end up having to defeat later on in a primary. And that's exactly the way the establishment talks about. If any establishment people are listening to this like, I can't believe this. Or if any of you are listening to this saying, oh, geez, I don't know if I can do that. Think about this. That's exactly what the establishment does. That's why they're actively not helping people like Thomas Jefferson, 45th House District. Because they know they'd rather he lose, and then they have a new primary in 2 years, and they can get their chosen person in, than he wins, and now he's harder to take down in 2 years. That's the dynamic. That's what we have to watch out for. Well, that's what I got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We'll be back here tomorrow. Hope you have a great rest of your day.